listening to Finding Your Genius Zone with Dirk Nevelle. It's not just a job. It's not just a paycheck. Or at least it doesn't have to be. With the help of experts across industries, Dirk helps you find your passion and career, as well as exposing the unknown parts of every vocation. Let's go deep. Let's find your genius zone right now. Here's Dirk Nevelle.
Everybody, this is Dirk. Welcome to the show. On with me today is a buddy of mine. I say a good buddy, and I feel that way. You know, even though I don't get to see Mark that much, he's one of the guys that came into my life back in, I think, my late 20s that made a big impact on me, just because he's not only super good at what he did, and I worked with him for a little bit, but just a cool dude, kind of like the kind of guy you want to go out and have some drinks with, hang out with, great athlete, just a guy that I really look up to. So Mark and I met back when we worked for Mark Cuban at broadcast.com. We were both in a sales capacity role. Broadcast was acquired by Yahoo, and we were part of that. I ended up leaving Yahoo. Mark stayed on, and he can talk to you a little bit about the pathway, but I'm going to throw it back to Mark and, have him introduce himself and maybe talk initially a little bit about kind of what you do, what your role is, your title, and then we'll go deeper.
Cool. Thanks for the intro, Dirk, the Bitcoins in your wallet. So yeah, Mark Wallrapp here. I make my home in Southern California. Currently, I'm a principal over the Reddit Deal Lab. The Deal Lab is a team that is charged with structuring our annual partnership agreements with our highest value partners. And these are companies that are essentially saying, hey, Reddit, we're bought into your platform. We want to work with you over the course of the next year. Here's our budget allocation. What can you offer us in return for a set of strategic and commercial benefits? And so I work with various cross-functional teams internally to package up an offering. And then ultimately, these clients, when we come to agreement, sign a term sheet, and we are off to the races. And essentially what we do is we pivot sort of the relationship from sort of short-term in-quarter thinking to longer-term strategic planning.
So would you put yourself in the biz dev category, sales? I mean, or how would you, like, what function do you provide?
Yeah, so it's a really good question, because there are partnerships do live in business development as well. Generally, those are more like content partnerships or media partnerships. I'm on the monetization side of the business, so strictly advertising partnerships where 95% of our revenue comes from advertising. And so I'm over that part of the business, if you will.
So kind of in the sales world of going out and getting these relationships, turning them into deals, correct?
Correct. I don't own the relationship. We have account teams that own the day-to-day relationships with our partners, our advertisers. But what our team does behind the scenes is make sure that they have a very structured framework for them to pitch and ultimately negotiate with the clients.
Yeah, maybe in a little bit we can go deeper. I think it's really important for, some of our audience that's coming out of school to really understand the different skill sets and roles that you can provide, like in a sexy technology company, right? You've always been in these really cool cutting edge companies, Facebook, Yahoo, broadcast.com. And, there are people that are out there winning the deal, and there's people that actually take care of those deals once they're clients. But talk a little bit about, just real quick, your background. You're a Boston kid. I think you had an interest to move out to LA, and I think you were in the Hollywood world for a while, like as an agent or something along those lines. Just kind of walk us through from A to Z how you got to where you are today.
Yeah, so, I graduated college, and like most folks, especially with a liberal education, really didn't know what I wanted to do. So I got in the car with couple buddies and moved to California. Didn't really know anyone. Saw the movie with Tom Cruise and decided I wanted to be a talent agent. And so Jerry Maguire was, now I'm dating myself, but Jerry Maguire was the movie. And so I literally came to California, submitted myself to a talent agency, was fortunate enough to get into a mailroom, worked my way up through the entertainment business. Ultimately, I was working with actors and actresses on representing their deals to the various studios and production companies, and had a mini epiphany in my like mid to late 20s where I was like, do I see myself long-term being in this industry? And the inner voice in my head sort of said no. And so I made a pivot, and I saw the opportunity at broadcast.com. And I'll never forget our former boss, Larry Sanford, looking at my resume. He's like, you don't have sales experience, but you're submitting yourself to a sales role here. And I said, Larry, I've been selling people for the last 5 years and their associated projects. So believe me, I think I've got the capacity to sell. Let's talk about broadcast. And so needless to say, he took a chance on me. And the rest is history. That was one of those defining moments in my career where I made a pivot at an age that I was still sort of not locked into my long-term career, and had some flexibility and took the risk.
Yeah. So let me ask you, there's two questions that come up. One is, Princeton, is that where you went?
I went to that other school. Yeah.
Sorry, I made a big mistake. I'm sorry.
No worries.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but those Ivy League schools, you're in a demographic where there's a lot of, I don't want to say pressure, but there's a lot of people raise the bar a lot. I mean, people are doing big things out of those schools. And so my assumption is you were exposed to kind of a definition of success of, people doing big stuff. So then you come out to LA, the attraction, I guess, being 23, 24, whatever, getting into the Hollywood, the movie business is kind of fun. Do you remember what that voice was? Was it like, there was something there that made you pivot. What was the voice? What was it based on? Like, I don't fit in here, or I don't know if I can hang in this crowd. What was it?
Well, there are a couple aspects to that question. The first is around exiting school and going to where a lot of folks would like move right to New York and go into the investment banking field with the degree that I had. That's not something that appealed to me because I did a summer internship in finance and just realized that that wasn't the path I wanted to go down. So took the road less traveled, 3,000 miles, show up to Hollywood. And that inner voice that you alluded to really takes time. If you're self-aware and you know what you know and you know what you're good at, ultimately, the entertainment industry, there were just certain aspects of it that didn't completely vibe with either my personality or where I saw my future. And the trend at the time was technology. And I saw this like technology trend sort of gaining momentum. And it felt like a much more meritocratic wave that I could jump on. What I mean by that is it just seemed to me like there were aspects of entertainment that were non-merit based. When you go from like one role to the next, I saw it too many times in person. And so recognizing that there were just nuance associated with that industry that I just didn't see myself part of long term, and listened to my voice and obviously pivoted to tech.
Cool. No, I just think it's important for people, like sometimes when you're coming out of school and you've got all these voices in your head, parents think you want to be a doctor or a lawyer or go to New York and live on Wall Street. It's important to pay attention to that voice. And sometimes you don't think, you're young and you just like, I don't know, I'm just going to go make money or whatever. But I think it's great at your age that you had that awareness. Just curious, because like I know my exposure, one of my best buddies in New York was having drinks with Mark Cuban, and I was in the business in a company up here. He told Mark about me, and next thing I knew, I was flying to Dallas. How did you hear about broadcasts in LA?
That's interesting. At the time, once I made that decision to pivot, I was sort of looking at the biggest companies out there that had the most amount of opportunity. And so, especially living in Los Angeles, like one of my philosophies is to think global, but act local. And in LA, acting local is also working close to where you live for obvious reasons. So there was an opportunity like 4 or 5 miles away from where I was living at Yahoo, which was the biggest platform on the internet at the time, besides AOL and a couple others. And so it was, to me, it was like, hey, let's think big. If I'm going to go and pivot in the other direction, why not go big?
Yeah. Okay, cool. So then you're at Yahoo, and then Yahoo turned into, was it Facebook?
I had a short stint there at realtor.com and polished up on my ad selling skills there, and then went over to Yahoo again for a second tour of duty, and then joined Facebook, now Meta, in 2008.
Cool. So one of the things I love about having you on is because, up here in Seattle, we've got a lot of technology, Amazon, Google, Facebook, Microsoft. People are really attracted to those types of companies. I think they move very fast. It's exciting. Stock options, people, are enamored with maybe making a lot of money. But there's another side to that world that I don't think, that's the goal, is to kind of get behind the curtains and educate people that are thinking about going down this road. Is there any, you've been in this world for a long time. You've done really well. I think, your job titles have changed, but you are kind of in the same world. And correct me if I'm wrong, but what is it about? Is there anything about the industries that you've been in, the companies you've been in, that have surprised you? Anything that you might want to shed some light on for somebody that's just like all in, but doesn't really know why? Like, even the good and the bad, like things that you're like, oh man, this is something that I'm not crazy about that you should be aware of. Is there anything that you can kind of talk about that might give somebody a little more clarity about this direction?
Yeah, so let's zoom out, and we'll talk about big tech for a minute. Clearly, there was a halo over Silicon Valley and big tech for a long time, because they were enamoring employees with a broad basket of benefits, and, as you referenced, stock options, and I did lots of different roles that appeal to different skill sets. And so for a 10-year period at these companies, there was a big opportunity to obviously not only identify a career, but also an opportunity to grow quickly, because as these companies grow quickly and you fulfill expectations at your given role, you're able to obviously graduate or matriculate into that next role. And so there's opportunities to get more equity and obviously a higher title each time you matriculate. And so that was really appealing for a lot of folks. And now I think that the glory days of tech might be in the rearview mirror, for lack of a better term. As you know, a couple 100,000 folks have been laid off in the last 6 months from big tech being a little bit bloated from all the over-hiring during COVID. So within all of this noise, it's been tough for some of these companies to maintain a culture that they've spent so many years building. And so my guidance to somebody, whether they're younger and looking to get into big tech, or maybe a little bit older and getting into big tech, is caveat emptor, like buyer beware. These companies are not the same. They're running these companies a lot differently than they did for a long time. And I'm not saying that they're still not great places to work. I'm just saying that there's a lot more to be mindful of as you enter into these companies that are not like things were even just 5 years ago.
Can you just give me a couple examples of some things that maybe, is it the income is dipped, or is it the, I don't know, like just trying to think of somebody that has no real world experience in working at all.
Yeah.
What has changed? What are a couple of things that have changed?
There's now a massive supply of folks that are looking and have been at these companies over the last 5 years. And so with demand, with a finite amount of supply, obviously slowing down, you're seeing that many of these companies are it's a lot more cutthroat internally. There's a lot more accountabilities, a lot more sort of Game of Thrones type of activities internally, politics, which look, their politics are associated with every company at all levels to one degree or another. But it feels to me, what I'm hearing from my friends at these companies, it's been heightened, right? More accountability, because when the markets and these companies and their stock prices are all up and to the right, and things are really good, you let certain things fall through the cracks, and there aren't as much accountabilities. But now, since there's a reckoning in the industry, right? You're starting to see a lot of these companies really sort of clamp down. They're eliminating layers of middle management. They're calibrating across different teams and essentially managing out like the bottom 10% of the calibrated employees on a half-yearly basis. So the net is if you're in one of these companies, identify a role that obviously you're going to excel at, because it is going to be a higher level of accountability as you progress.
Yeah, like really what I'm thinking is like job stability. It's like, you could be a tradesman, go be a plumber, electrician. I'm interviewing people in every industry, every type of role. But in big tech, the sexiness and the attraction to it and the pace, but you also have to deal with the potential of, the economy goes the other way and, you might be out of a job. You've been one of the people that I know that has not been booted out. You've done really well. I've always followed your career from afar. What is it about Mark, like that, why are you good at what you do? Like, what's your zone of genius? Why have you been able to kind of, all these companies you've worked with, are amazing companies, and you've done really well in those companies. What is it about you that's kind of allowed you to stay the path?
Interesting question. I think, one thing is I'm pretty self-aware on the things the attributes that I bring to the table. And then obviously recognize some of the aspects of me being a candidate that might be weaker than other folks at my level. So I play to my strengths and try and work on some of my opportunities for growth. I think in life, there are givers and takers. And I try to partner with folks internally, especially by being a giver first, and then asking for something in return. And I think that's really sort of creates this virtuous cycle while everyone's trying to get things done, showing people that I'm willing to do the dirty work first before I make an ask internally to partner with them on a project that we might be co-authoring. So it's a little bit tactical, but those are two things just off the top of my head.
So just, I don't mean to ask the same question, but strengths, like, like when you're thinking about getting into this business, I would be curious if you could just touch on what you think your two of your strengths are. And at the end of the day, someone's listening and they're kind of trying to think, am I like Mark? Do I have the same traits, the same skill sets? Would I do well in this industry? What are like your top two strengths that have allowed you to do as well as you have?
I'd say being able to succinctly characterize like lots of information in short bursts, right? We live in this world of infinite information and infinite choice. And by definition, if you can crystallize like complicated concepts in simple ways and get to your point and listen more than you're sort of speaking at people, I think that's one thing. I think being analytical is really critical at this day and age, being a candidate in almost any industry, right? Like we live in a world that's driven by data, and many decisions now are data driven by nature. And so having sort of an analytical background as well, and it doesn't have to be engineering, but understanding analytics and how that plays a role in your day-to-day remit and also within the company's remit.
So like on a weekend, are you the kind of guy that reads up on technology because you love it, you want to, or are you just doing it out of security, making sure that you don't drop down? Like is this a natural thing for you? Because like, I'll be honest, when I was in technology, I wasn't really excited about it. And like, I felt myself getting passed up by people who had genuine excitement. And they're like literally reading Wired, and they're like, it was their thing. And I was always watching, I was reading Sports Illustrated or National Geographic, but yeah. I didn't have a genuine passion around. I like technology. I like to use it, but I wasn't passionate about it. How about you?
I'm pretty passionate about it. I listen to podcasts while I'm at the gym to follow emerging trends within the industry. I love staying on top of trends and seeing how that's potentially going to impact either my day-to-day role or the company that I'm working with and for. And so some of the sources of information that I turn to are like Stratechery and Ben Thompson and The Information. And these are like premium sources of content that go deeper into the plumbing of technology and how it works and why it works the way it does. So I do really enjoy sort of embracing technology as a whole, and it serves me well at work, because not only do I, show up every day with my own domain expertise, but then I'm able to add some context for my team into the mix to provide sort of an overall perspective on why we might be doing something relative to an industry trend, for instance.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's so important, because I've seen people in my life, friends like you, and, people separate themselves, they differentiate themselves from the pack. And sometimes it translates to success, whether it's money or whatever, a type of lifestyle. But typically behind that is like genuine passion, genuine interest in what they're doing, versus somebody that's kind of faking it or just kind of getting by. But, that's the thing, is like, if I would love to see more people pay attention to what really is inside them and drives them. Because I think when they do, it allows them to kind of reach levels that others don't. And speaking of that, like getting, in the head of a 24-year-old or some guy coming out of Princeton like you did, or not Princeton, I'm sorry, but some coming out of college, like people don't think like that at that age. At least I should say many don't. I think a lot of folks have different voices in their head. They're thinking about careers in terms of money, and maybe they're starting a family and they want to buy a nice house on the beach or whatever. But like, what kind of advice maybe would you give to somebody to try to step back, maybe get a little out of the head, into the heart, and try to take inventory of kind of who they are and try to like align their career with who they are as a person? Because I don't think many young people think like that. And I think if they did, they would end up, it's kind of like dating. I think you would end up with the right person if you chose,
Sure.
who you dated. Dating is a lot. You can use dating in every example of life, but what kind of advice maybe would you give to somebody that's watching this and they're like, wow, these are all amazing companies. And I want to be like Mark, but like step back and get in the head of these kids. And is there something?
It's interesting because 24, 25, that's a very impressionable age where you still have the dexterity to choose the direction with limited risk, right? My father was helped kids for years back in Boston, sort of with personal and professional development. And one of the things that he would do is chat with them about what they're good at. There were personality tests that you can take in this day and age to get a real sense for like who you are and what color you fit within the matrix and how does that map to certain roles. At the end of the day, I also think, and I encourage younger folks to call people that talk to people, take people out to coffee, like myself, if that's a role that they see themselves in. They see themselves being a fireman someday. Go take a fireman out to lunch and pick their brain, and they'll be candid with you about the good, the bad, and the indifferent about their role. And so interview people. And at a certain point, you'll be like, okay, I'm naturally good at this, which I know because I'm me. And then I've gathered enough data on what I think I want to be. And the path to a career is very nonlinear in nature, unless you're a specialist, right? If you know you want to be a doctor or an accountant or a certain like specialist type profession where you need continued education, then that's like a very specific path. But if it's more broad and you have more flexibility, follow your and it's kind of cliche, but like talk to people, follow your passions, do a lot of diligence, and try, if you're still in college, obviously try to intern. And I think at the end of the day, it's like when I say nonlinear, I mean like don't get frustrated because you're probably gonna get a job somewhere and you could be there for 3 or 6 months and be like, wow, I just don't like what I'm doing. And I think a lot of folks will get frustrated at that point and start blaming themselves. And the reality is we live in a world that's evolving so quickly. And so if you can't adapt with change over time, you're going to have a tough go. So almost factor into your own personal algorithm that things are going to be bumpy. And it took me until I was like late 20s to identify like the path that ultimately served me well.
I love it. I was thinking, my wife always gives me shit because I when I go to the airport, I always want to leave super early because I'm always factoring in bad traffic or accidents or something. And we're always sitting there 2 hours before. But I think that's really great advice. Let's get into a little bit about like, someone can Google and read about what you do and what your role is, but like the life behind it in terms of things like freedom, your days. Do you feel like you can get away? We could even talk about not what you make, but just the nature of compensation and your type of role. Some of the behind the scenes critical components of your career that you might be able to enlighten people on a little bit.
Well, first thing I would say is COVID was a game changer. I used to, like most Americans, have to get up and prepare myself and jump in a car for 45 minutes to an hour each way. And the fact that now there's like the flexibility at most companies for remote work has really served me well. It doesn't serve everybody well. In big cities, I have colleagues that have kids and like they look forward to getting into an office. I think the magic's somewhere in the middle where there's like this hybrid 2 to 3 days a week in an office. 4 to 5 is overkill. Again, like every company is different. But so my day to day is really, I wake up in the morning, I check Slack, I respond to emails. I'll then go to my standing desk, which I'm here now. I spend 4 or 5 hours on Zoom calls, video conferencing with my team or cross-functional folks. I may take a half hour over lunch for myself. Then in the afternoon, I'll take some me time. I'll concentrate on my wellness. And then late at night, I spend a couple hours really doing like the busy work. Because during the day, you're sort of like on the hamster wheel, like just responding to things. You're very like reactive to Slack, to email, to phone calls. At night, when it's just me, I'm locked in on like the longer form projects that I'm locked into. And then most importantly, my calendar. Your time is probably the most valuable thing, asset to anybody. And so I really focus on being very intentional about my calendar the next day, the next week. And once I get that buttoned up, I wake up each morning knowing the next step in my day way in advance.
So do you plan like the day before you plan your next day?
Oh yeah. I have the next 5 to 7 days pretty much planned out.
Okay. And did you feel it yourself, like getting pulled away on weekends? I mean, I know you like what you do, so it probably doesn't feel like work, but for someone that's considering technology and a sales biz dev type of role, I mean, what should they expect? I mean, it's not a 9 to 5 gig, right?
They actually are. Now, what I mean by that is there's no expectation in tech to work on the weekends. But there's your own personal expectations on how good you want to be at your job. And so when most other people at your company or at your job are not working on the weekends, it's an opportunity for you to go the extra mile and work on projects that might be outside of your scope. And an opportunity to differentiate yourself from your peer set. So I utilize the weekends to really button up on like the remedial tasks, like expense reports and, writing reviews on my team members. But there's no expectation in tech really to be on call on the weekends, unless you're responsible for, obviously, you're an engineer and you're making sure that Twitter, Reddit, or Meta are staying online.
Yeah, I get it. So as far as your job, your career, I know it's important to me. I think we talked a little bit about it. Like freedom is a huge thing for me, and being able to coach my kids in sports and not get pulled away on holidays or birthdays and going to bed with them, waking up with them. What are the components or factors in your job, your career that are important to you that you need out of your job?
I think the number one aspect of job satisfaction is the person that you work for and roll into. People leave managers, they don't leave companies. They generally join a company because they've done diligence on the culture and they've identified a role which they think they can be really good at. In most cases, I have found that people will leave companies because there's some sort of conflict with their direct manager. And so that's critical, is just like, obviously you can control that in many instances, right? Because you're interviewing with the hiring manager before you get into the company. So that's number one. Number two is culture, right? Like some folks are just not cultural fits. I would say like Elon Musk's companies, right? Like he has such a distinct culture that you either fit into that culture on what he's trying to and how he operates, or you don't. And so I think really like going to the various job boards and researching from current employees what the current temperature is and culture of a company is critical. If you don't want to opt in and then be like, well, wait a sec, I don't stand by this company's values.
I want to stop real quick because I know it varies from A to Z. I mean, not everybody has the same personality, but culture, like fitting in, like if there was a stereotypical person that fit in your industry or your line of work, and I know you talked about bosses and relationships but like what would be a type of personality fit in your industry? Somebody, or maybe a personality fit that doesn't fit, right? That doesn't work. Does that make sense?
It does. And I would say a couple things. Number one, companies that are in the know and building solutions that are meant for global audiences, by definition, have a very specific focus on hiring a diverse workforce for obvious reasons. And so we like and respect and look for competing personalities because we're building a global product and we're not looking for consensus. We're looking to attack sort of what we're doing and presenting to the world from multiple points of view. So diversity is critical. And diversity isn't just like racial or ethnic diversity, it's diversity of opinions. Secondarily, I would say from a personality trait perspective, the ability to be fluid and be okay in fast-moving environments that are changing, right? A month and a half ago, prior to ChatGPT, most people thought like, the next 3 to 5 years was pretty baked. ChatGPT represents like an iPhone moment of 14 years ago, where literally the entire industry as we know it will pivot in a new direction. And so there's this like new wave that companies are going to have to embrace if they're going to want to keep up with the pace of change.
That's really an interesting subject. And I'm sure we could do a whole podcast on it. Can you just tell me how the how that is changing things? And I know that's probably, you could turn that into a long conversation, but how has that impacted your industry? You said 4 months ago or 4 years ago?
No, it was like a month and a half ago where like ChatGPT was finally revealed to the public.
Yeah.
And so I'll reference what I was speaking about 15 minutes ago as it relates to we live in a world of infinite information, photos, videos, knowledge. What ChatGPT and their models do is allow these models to go capture enormous amounts of information and identify pattern recognition and provide very simple outputs through large language processing. And so I can now go in to ChatGPT and them to provide me a sample cover letter. And if I'm specific in my inputs, it will literally like comb all the different cover letter sources and provide me a very specific output, which is so much different than traditional search, where you would essentially just take you to a website link somewhere, which would give you an answer, but then you would have to delve deeper to get your actual output. So this is going to reimagine the web and the way people experience information moving forward.
Yeah, another example, you got to be on top of it, right? I'm in the dinosaur business of mortgages, and we don't move as quick as you guys do, but it's a great example. Like if you commit to this industry, you're going to have to be on top of the cutting edge technology, not only understand it, but be really fluent in it in terms of talking about it. I know that with clients and certain deals you're working on, it's all confidential, but is there any way you could kind of paint or illustrate a picture of like, what's like a typical deal? Like, for me, I help people get financed. I think your roommate does the same kind of work. In your world, like what is like an example of a typical deal that not only what you're doing in terms of the value proposition, but maybe how long that might take to, put together. I mean, are these long sales cycles? Can these be quick sales cycles? Like, give somebody an idea of what they would expect on, like, what's expected of you, like who you're going after. I don't know if you have a vertical in terms of industry, or if you're going after, everybody. I think years ago you were dealing with companies in Vegas in the entertainment world, but can you give us an example of a deal that you're working on or have worked on or is common in your world?
Sure. So primarily it's larger companies that have already and are already investing in our peer set publishers like Meta, like TikTok, like Twitter, Pinterest, Snapchat, and they're trying to extend their audiences beyond those platforms. And Reddit's a fantastic place to do that because we have a naturally curious psychographic of 50 million Americans and X number of non-Americans outside the US that embrace the platform on a daily basis. And so when these companies think about the marketing outcomes that they're trying to produce, they see Reddit as now like a top 10 option. And so what my team does is we take the best of what Reddit has to offer, and we structure a partnership agreement that goes into a term sheet. It's non-binding in nature. And ultimately, it just gives us a map on how we can work better together over the course of the next 12 months. The companies range from Disney, Toyota, and Samsung to, smaller, more direct to consumer companies like Huel and a myriad of other sort of mid or long tail advertisers that still derive value from our platform. They just do it in different ways.
So what do you think? I mean, as far as your career path, I mean, have you reached where you want to be? What are you thinking in terms of like the next 5-10 years?
I feel pretty good where I'm at. I've got like a level of job satisfaction that's very high. The person and the people that I work with, we're all supportive. Our company's going through an event over the next 9 to 12 months, which, after 18 years of being private, we're going to be going public. So there's a lot of readiness that's happening behind the scenes as it relates to those pursuits. So I'm not complacent. I'm just trying to be the best version of myself as Reddit tries to be the best version of ourself. So when we do get to the public markets and there's more scrutiny, we're able to show well.
I love it. As we wind this down a little bit, I always ask this question: if you could go back in time, knowing what you know now, would you have chosen this route, or do you think you would have done something different?
I have no regrets with going into entertainment. Obviously, with the benefit of hindsight, like if I got into tech earlier, would that alter where I am now? I think the past is prologue, right? At the end of the day, I think that understanding that the future is unpredictable by definition, and so being able to adapt, overcome, improvise, and ultimately survive in advance, to use a March Madness term, is the bigger picture way to sort of think about your career. It's become an expert. If you know what you want to do, get your 10,000 hours in. And once you're a true expert, stay up to date on the trends. So you can obviously be on the cutting edge of where things are going.
Okay, so let's just say technology, anything related to is off the table. What would be I'm just curious, what would be a dream job of yours? Like just to get to know, the audience members get to know you a little bit better. Like, what would you love to do? Is there a dream job?
Yeah, I'd probably like to be a defensive coordinator in college football, or I'd probably like to be a caddy on the tour.
I think you could play on the tour, don't you?
And I wish. Yeah, I love the game of golf as well, and so it'd be fun to be out there every day with the best in the world. But yeah, it's an interesting question. I haven't given that a lot of thought.
I'm just curious. I've golfed with Mark, and he's a great golfer, great athlete. Anything as we finish this up? I mean, think about getting in the head of a young lady or young man, just like really struggling. Like, is there anything else that you feel compelled to, like, advice wise, give somebody to help them kind of lower the bar a little bit, the pressure, and ease into this next chapter of their life?
Yeah, not to make a blanket statement, but I do think that younger generations are putting so much more urgency on themselves to achieve success quickly and expeditiously. And the reality is those who build a career brick by brick over time are the ones that I feel like have the highest probability for success. So there's a fine line between urgency and slow and steady wins the race. And so if you can find like where that is for yourself in your own personal algorithms, I feel like it's a good foundational way to think about your career.
Yeah, that's great advice, Mark. Thanks again, my friend, for coming aboard. I think this is great information, and I know it's going to help a lot of people if they have a chance to watch this. Anything else you might want to say as we end this?
Yeah, just I think we tackled a bunch of it. I do feel like the last thing I'd like to say is, like, big tech gets most of the headlines, even on Wall Street, right? Like they're driving markets. And the reality is there's still millions and millions of companies out there, both domestically and abroad, that are not big tech, that have digitally transformed, especially after COVID, right? Where if you were Walmart, you would now like actually have a direct to consumer product. And now there's Walmart grocery. And my point is there are so many traditional companies now that have digitally transformed, and those can be amazing companies to work at. And so I know, like, the crux of today's discussion were around, like, technology companies, but the reality is there's still lots of opportunities at non-technology companies to identify a career path and have a long and healthy career at. So just some 2 cents I'll finish the conversation with.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thanks again, Mark. I appreciate it. You threw a lot of gold out there, and I know people are going to benefit from it. So thank you.
Yeah, sounds good. Thanks, man. Good to see you.